The Contra series was very well liked in the 8-bit and 16-bit era, but could not find the same footing after that. The PS1 games specifically were not well received. With this new Contra game in the picture, how would the developers bring back the series in a positive way? Did they try something new, or did they play it safe? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Podrez, coming at you with another video. If you've seen a couple of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. I do release new videos every Wednesday, so this will be a way to keep up with it. And I do have a Discord server, just go to discord.podrez.net. I'll also put a link right in the description. Anyway, let's talk about Contra Operation Galuga. Contra was commonly regarded as one of the best games on the NES. It's a basic run and gun game where you collect weapon upgrades and you fight a boss at the end. The controls were revolutionary for their time. You could aim in all directions, including diagonally, which was not super common back then. The sequel, Super C, did not change the core gameplay, but introduced some new levels. Contra 3 allowed you to carry 2 guns at a time instead of 1, had better aiming controls, and would introduce climbing mechanics. Contra Hardcore let you play as different characters, each of which had their own set of guns. There were also different paths you could take that changed the outcome of the game. A lot of these new additions would become common trends in Contra games. The Contra series had a great run on 8-bit and 16-bit consoles, but would not have the same success after that. On the PlayStation, Konami published 2 Contra games. Contra Legacy of War attempted a top-down 3D perspective, which is a risky move because it's the first 3D Contra game. It's not easy to take a series that has only had 2D games and turn it into a 3D one. Later on, we got C, the Contra Adventure, which was a 2.5D game. This time, they played it safe and gave us a similar experience to the original games, at least on the first level. Unfortunately, neither of these games were well received. The franchise wouldn't get a whole lot of attention after this. In 2007, Konami hired the company Way Forward to make Contra 4. The company played it very safe with this game. It borrows a lot of elements from the previous Contra games and doesn't really try anything new. It's basically a remake of the original games with some minor improvements. The developers probably realized that they had to closely imitate the classic Contra games because all the games that try to be different were not well received. In my opinion, the developers played it a little bit too safe, and I wish they went with a more original game than a remake. But still, if you liked the original Contra games, this is a nice return to form. In September 2023, a trailer would be released for Contra Operation Galuga, and in March 2024, a little over a week after this video, the game would be released. I'm glad Way Forward was behind this one too, because they did a good job with their previous Contra game. Given that I've talked about Contra a lot on this channel, I figured I would offer my perspective on this game, so let's check it out. They got the core gameplay 100% correct. Even though it's in 2.5D, the controls feel exactly like the classic Contra games. You're able to aim your gun not just diagonally, but even at unusual angles thanks to the Switch Pro controller. This allows you to destroy enemies that would normally be out of reach in other Contra games. You can also stand still while aiming diagonally, which came from Contra 3. You can carry 2 guns, and like in Contra 4, obtaining the same gun twice gives you an upgraded version of that gun. These are all features from previous Contra games, but there's a few new abilities. You can perform a dash, which gives you a small boost left or right. This can be a useful trick to avoid certain obstacles, but not all characters have this ability. You can also double jump, which I did not expect to see, but it's a useful ability to get yourself out of danger. However, not all characters can double jump. Speaking of characters, you have multiple that you can pick from, and they all have differences. Bill and Lance are the most well-rounded characters. They can double jump and perform the dash, which are the 2 best abilities. Later in the game, you unlock Lucia. She can dash, but cannot double jump. Instead, she can grapple onto ceilings above her. However, this is not a super useful ability. I think Bill and Lance are better. Ariana is the worst character in the game. She can double jump, but cannot dash. Instead, she can perform a slide, which is similar to dashing, but you can only do it when you're on the ground, so it's much worse. but the biggest problem with her is her life bar. She can only take 2 hits instead of 3 like the other characters can. There's literally no reason to use Ariana. Despite some characters being better than others, I do think it's cool that you have them in the first place. It gives the game some replayability. If you beat the game with one character, you can try another. For the most part, the guns are all the same across the board for each character, but there's 1 or 2 tiny differences. For example, Lucia doesn't have the spread gun. When she collects the S icon, she gets this charging gun that can deal a lot of damage. The other characters just have the regular spread gun. It's cool that they made some small alterations, but I prefer how Konami did it with Contra Hardcore, where each character had a completely different set of guns. The game actually has a lot of dialogue, which you will see in between stages and sometimes even during them. You do see some cursing in this game, which pays homage to Contra Hardcore. That game also had dialogue and swearing. It certainly doesn't hurt to have a storyline within the game, but I personally don't care for it. I just want to get right to the action. The developers did play it pretty safe with the core gameplay. The first stage is obviously inspired by the first game. In stage 2, you're on a motorcycle, which is identical to both Contra 3 and Contra Hardcore. In stage 3, you travel up a waterfall, which is from the original game. In stage 4, you hang on poles and avoid those dragonfly enemies, which is from Contra 3. Even a lot of the bosses were taken from previous Contra games. It's clear that they played it safe, but despite that, I do think Way Forward made enough changes for this to be considered a standout title rather than just a remake. If most of the game were just rehashed stages from previous games, that would be a different story. But the stages themselves, outside of maybe stage 1, are original but with some familiar concepts thrown in. Most people say that this game is a remake of the first Contra game, but I think it takes inspiration from all of them, not just one in particular. Let's talk about the difficulty. The developers allow you to pick what difficulty you want and whether you prefer one-hit deaths or life bar. You also have unlimited continues. These are nice features because someone who's new to Contra games might feel overwhelmed by how hard this game is. You're better off sticking with Bill or Lance throughout the game. The short-range weapons like the fire gun and C-gun are not super great in this game because a lot of enemies are unreachable. The M-gun doesn't seem all that different from the regular gun you start off with. The homing gun is the best weapon in the game in my opinion, with the laser gun being second. I also noticed that sometimes it's better to speed through certain parts rather than shooting everything down. While they got a lot of aspects right, there's a few things that I don't like. The frame rate, at least in the Switch version, is not great. It feels like 30 frames a second, but don't quote me on that. While the game does have very nice visuals, they went a little overboard with the flashy effects, especially on the motorcycle stages. You're constantly moving between different backgrounds and it can get confusing. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on, and a couple times I actually lost where my character was. This can result in taking some unnecessary damage. I also had a few minor issues with the controls. For some reason, you're able to climb nearly every object in this game. This can result in you accidentally clinging on the ceilings and walls that you didn't mean to and being temporarily stuck. I also had a lot of trouble aiming down. A few times I accidentally crouched down when I actually meant to point my gun down. Both of these things will immobilize your character temporarily and might result in you getting hit. The price of this game is $36, which seems a little high for a game like this. You do get a good amount of content here. There's 8 stages total, which is not the shortest Contra game, and there's unlockable content like extra music and additional characters you can play as. You do get a lot of replayability, but I figured that a fairly dead franchise like Contra would be no more than $20, and I do think the price will eventually go down to that. The game Sonic Mania, which is somewhat comparable to this game, was only $20 when it came out. $36 seems a bit high. So what are my final thoughts? Way Forward definitely played it safe by delivering a game that's similar to the classic Contra games, but with some cool upgrades. The controls are better, there's more characters to play as, and you get a lot of content here. The game is not just a remake like I thought it would be, and it actually delivers an original experience. But the aiming controls could be better, the frame rate is bad, the climbing is awkward, and the game is a bit too expensive. But if you're looking for a good Contra game that's like the originals, you'll have a good time with this. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.